It was a period of my life that I wish I could erase entirely, a time when the world felt like it had turned its back on me. A few years ago, I found myself in the depths of despair after ending a 5-year relationship with the woman I thought would be my wife. The breakup wasn't just an emotional blow, it shattered me to my core. I spiraled into a state of isolation, barely speaking to anyone and losing all sense of normalcy. My days blurred together in a haze of work, sleep, and mindless Netflix binges. I stopped taking care of myself, skipping meals, neglecting personal hygiene, and avoiding human interaction at all costs. It's strange how quickly one can become a shadow of who they once were. And yet, as low as I thought I could go during those dark months, nothing prepared me for what happened that fateful Saturday night that still haunts me to this day. That evening I was slumped on the couch in my bedroom, which doubles as my living room since I rarely venture beyond its walls anymore. Outside, the air was crisp with the promise of spring, but inside, the atmosphere was suffocating. I had cracked open a few windows earlier, hoping the cool breeze might clear some of the heaviness lingering in the house. As per usual, I was half watching another forgettable movie, something loud and action-packed, though I couldn't tell you the plot if my life depended on it. The screen flickered dimly, casting eerie shadows across the room. Around 9 p.m., my phone buzzed incessantly, my mom calling for the 4th time that day. I let it ring out, guilt gnawing at me, but I simply didn't have the strength to face her questions or her concern. Instead, I pressed pause on the movie, intending to switch to something else. But before I could make a selection, I heard it, a sharp, metallic clang, so sudden and jarring that it sent a chill down my spine. At first, I thought it was part of the film. Maybe the audio mix was bad, or perhaps it was supposed to be some cheap attempt at building tension. But then it happened again, louder this time, echoing through the silence of the paused movie. My heart began to race as realization dawned on me. The sound wasn't coming from the TV. It was real, and it was somewhere inside my house. I froze, staring at the blank screen, listening intently for any sign of movement. For a moment, everything was quiet, almost too quiet. Then, about 45 seconds later, the clang rang out once more, unmistakable and deliberate. Panic surged through me and I leapt to my feet. Grabbing the first weapon I could find, a small kitchen knife I kept on my desk. With trembling hands, I moved from room to room, checking every closet, under every piece of furniture, searching for any trace of an intruder. But there was nothing. No signs of forced entry, no evidence that anyone had been there at all. Still, the sound persisted, fainter now, as if it were coming from outside. That's when I remembered the windows I'd left open. Pushing aside the curtain ever so slightly, I peered out into the backyard. What I saw chilled me to the bone. One of my deck chairs had been dragged into the middle of the lawn, and standing beside it was a figure, a child, judging by their size. They were holding what appeared to be a PVC pipe, and as I watched, they struck it against the chair, producing the exact same metallic clang that had been tormenting me for the past hour. The sight of them should have brought relief. They were just a kid, after all, but instead, it filled me with an overwhelming sense of dread. There was something unnatural about the way they stood there, perfectly still except for the rhythmic motion of hitting the pipe against the chair. Their face was obscured by the darkness, but I could feel their gaze boring into me, cold and unblinking. It wasn't curiosity or mischief. It was something far more sinister. My mind raced with possibilities. Was this child lost? Had they wandered away from home? Or worse, was this some kind of twisted prank orchestrated by someone older, someone watching from the shadows? Whatever the explanation, the fact that they had been standing there for nearly an hour without making a sound other than the clanging made my skin crawl. Summoning what little courage I had left, I decided to confront them. I grabbed a flashlight and headed downstairs, turning on the porch light as I approached the door. But as I reached for the doorknob, something stopped me cold. Something about the situation felt wrong. If the child truly needed help, wouldn't they have knocked or called out to me? Why would they resort to such bizarre behavior unless they wanted to draw attention to themselves, and why now, in the dead of night? A sinking feeling settled in my stomach as I realized I might be walking into a trap. Slowly, I backed away from the door and crept toward a nearby window, careful not to make a sound. Peering through the blinds, I scanned the area outside, praying I wouldn't see anything unusual. But what I saw next turned my blood to ice. Crouched beneath my back door were two men dressed head to toe in black, their faces obscured by masks. They looked like predators lying in wait, ready to pounce the moment I stepped outside. One of them suddenly turned his head, locking eyes with me through the glass. In that instant, I knew I was in grave danger. Dropping the blinds, I sprinted upstairs, fumbling with my phone as I dialed 911. Barely halfway up the staircase, I heard the deafening crash of my back door being forced open. Heavy footsteps echoed through the house, growing louder with each passing second. My breath came in ragged gasps as I scrambled into the bathroom, slamming the door shut behind me and locking it. The sound of someone trying to break in followed, accompanied by violent kicks that rattled the doorframe. I screamed at the top of my lungs that the police were on their way, and mercifully the intruders fled, leaving me alone to process the nightmare I had just endured. When the officers arrived, they searched the property but found no trace of the men or the child. Yet, as I sat in the kitchen the following morning, nursing a sprained ankle from my failed escape attempt, I noticed something that made my stomach churn. On the counter lay a crumpled piece screenplay of paper, hastily scrawled with the words, "We'll be back." The morning after the harrowing events with the child and the two men in black, I woke up feeling like a ghost haunting my own house. My body was stiff from sleeping on the bathroom floor, and every creak of the house made me jump. The police had assured me they would patrol the area, but deep down, I knew their efforts wouldn't stop whoever or whatever had come for me last night. Still, life has a way of forcing you to move forward, even when your mind is stuck replaying the same terrifying loop. That's why, despite everything, I decided to stick to my usual routine, heading to the gym early Monday morning. It wasn't just about staying fit, it was about clinging to some semblance of normalcy. But little did I know, that decision would lead me straight into another nightmare. As I drove through the quiet residential streets toward the gym, something caught my eye: a bright, garish ice cream truck parked along the curb. Its engine was off, no lights were on, and it looked completely out of place in the chilly March air. School hadn't let out yet, so there weren't any kids around to justify its presence. At first, I thought it must be broken down or abandoned. But as I passed by, curiosity got the better of me, and I slowed down enough to glance inside. The driver's seat was empty, which should have been reassuring, but instead, it sent a chill down my spine. Why would an ice cream truck just sit there unattended at 6:30 in the morning? I tried to shake it off, convincing myself it was probably nothing more than a coincidence. After all, this was a sleepy neighborhood where nothing ever happened. But as fate would have it, the truck was still there when I returned home later that day. This time, though, it wasn't parked in the same spot, it had moved closer to my street. A knot formed in my stomach as I pulled into my driveway. Something about its deliberate repositioning felt sinister, almost predatory. Over the next few hours, I found myself compulsively checking the window every half hour, watching the truck inch closer and closer to my house. Each time it moved, my anxiety spiked higher. By mid-afternoon, I couldn't take it anymore. Grabbing a pair of binoculars from my brother's stash, I stationed myself in the guest bedroom, which offered a clearer view of the street. Through the lenses, I finally saw him, the driver. He was hunched over the steering wheel, his face obscured by shadows. But then, he raised a pair of binoculars to his eyes and stared directly back at me. His grin was grotesque, revealing crooked yellow teeth, and his gaze radiated pure malevolence. In that moment, I realized he wasn't just parked there randomly, he was watching me. Panic surged through me as he abruptly dropped the binoculars, started the engine, and drove away. For a brief second, relief washed over me, but it didn't last long. That night, I woke suddenly in the pitch-black darkness of my bedroom. My heart pounded erratically as I fumbled for my phone on the nightstand. It was nearly 3 a.m. and the silence was suffocating. Then I heard the faint jingle of an ice cream truck's music drifting through the air. My blood ran cold. Before I could process what was happening, something clicked softly against my bedroom window. Rocks. Someone was throwing rocks at my window to wake me up. Summoning every ounce of courage I had left, I crept toward the window, pulling the curtain aside just enough to peek out. What I saw froze me in place. Standing in the middle of my front yard was the man from earlier, flanked by two small figures who barely reached his waist. They looked like children, though their faces were shrouded in shadow. But it wasn't their size that horrified me, it was their posture. Both of them stood unnaturally still, their arms raised high above their heads, pointing directly at my window. Their blank stares pierced through the darkness, locking onto mine with an eerie intensity that felt otherworldly. I stumbled backward, my breath hitching in my throat. My instincts screamed at me to act, so I bolted downstairs to wake my father. By the time we rushed outside, the trio had vanished without a trace. The police arrived shortly afterward, but they found nothing, no footprints, no discarded objects, no sign of forced entry. Frustrated and terrified, I went back to bed, only to be plagued by nightmares of those two children crying for help, their voices echoing endlessly in my ears. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them standing outside my window, accusing me with their hollow gazes. Weeks passed, and though no one else seemed to notice anything unusual, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Shadows flickered at the edges of my vision, and phantom footsteps echoed through the halls at night. I began doubting my own sanity, wondering if the stress of recent events had finally pushed me over the edge. Then, one afternoon, a package arrived in the mail. Inside was a bizarre postcard featuring a crudely drawn image of an ice cream truck beneath a blood-red sky. Scribbled across the bottom were the chilling words, "They haven't been saved." It had been months since the ice cream truck incident, but my life was far from returning to normal. The unsettling feeling of being watched lingered like a shadow I couldn't shake off, no matter how hard I tried. My parents assured me that everything would settle down eventually, but deep inside, I knew something sinister was still lurking just beneath the surface. By day, I forced myself to maintain some semblance of routine working at the BMW dealership, answering calls and pretending nothing was wrong. But by night, paranoia consumed me. Every creak of the house, every flicker of movement outside my window felt like a threat. Little did I know, the worst was yet to come. One evening, as I sat in bed scrolling through social media, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number flashing across the screen. It was past 10 p.m., late for any legitimate call, but given my job, I couldn't afford to ignore it. Reluctantly, I answered, only to be greeted by static, a thick, uneven fuzz that sent chills down my spine. At first, I thought it was just another scammer or a glitch, so I prepared to hang up. Then, faintly beneath the noise, I heard something unmistakable, my own voice. The realization hit me like a freight train. The voice wasn't random, it was replaying a conversation I'd had earlier that day with a client about pricing options and scheduling a test drive. My heart raced as I listened closer. It wasn't just my voice. It was an exact replica of the entire exchange, word for word. Panicked, I ended the call immediately, staring at my phone in disbelief. What kind of twisted game was this? Was someone recording my conversations without my knowledge? Over the next few days, the calls continued, each one more unnerving than the last. They always came late at night when I was most vulnerable. And they weren't limited to one mysterious number, they came from different numbers, all untraceable. Each time, the recordings grew clearer, focusing solely on my side of the conversations. It was as if whoever was behind this wanted me to feel exposed, stripped bare of privacy. But the true horror began when I noticed something else. After each call ended, my phone would automatically send out texts to everyone in my contact list. The messages were identical, "Help me," followed by my home address. At first, I assumed it was a glitch, perhaps malware installed on my device. But when friends and family started calling to ask if I was okay, I realized the severity of the situation. Someone or something was deliberately sabotaging my life, turning my trusted connections against me. Desperate for answers, I checked my call history one night and discovered something even more alarming. Dozens of outgoing calls had been made while I was asleep, all to unknown numbers. Whoever was doing this wasn't just invading my waking hours, they were manipulating my very existence, disrupting my sleep patterns, and making me question my sanity. Determined to confront the source of these disturbances, I decided to answer the next call from my car, where I could survey my surroundings safely. That decision proved to be both reckless and enlightening. As I sat in the driver's seat, gripping my phone tightly, the familiar static filled the line. Before I could react, I glanced up and saw a figure standing a few meters away. They wore a hooded sweatshirt, their face obscured, and held what appeared to be a glowing smartphone. For a brief moment, our eyes met through the windshield, and I felt a wave of terror unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Without thinking, I bolted out of the car, shouting for them to stop. But as quickly as they had appeared, they vanished into thin air, leaving behind only the faint echo of footsteps fading into the distance. I searched frantically, scanning every corner of the parking lot, but there was no trace of them. It was as though they had never existed. Yet the memory of their presence haunted me long after I returned home. Convinced that my old number was compromised beyond repair, I switched to a new one, hoping to sever whatever link the caller had to my life, but the relief was short-lived. A week later, I received an anonymous email containing a recording of one of the previous calls, along with a chilling message. "Don't think you can escape." The audio file played on a loop, taunting me with fragments of my own voice. Sleep became impossible. Every shadow seemed alive, every sound carried malice. Then came the night of the meeting. Following the instructions left in the email, I waited anxiously at my kitchen table, a handgun clutched in my trembling hands. The clock struck 11 p.m., and for a moment silence reigned. Just as I began to believe it was all a cruel prank, three figures emerged from the darkness outside my door. Their faces were hidden beneath masks, and their movements were eerily synchronized. Heart pounding, I aimed the gun at the entrance, ready to defend myself. But before I could pull the trigger, they dissolved into the night, leaving behind no evidence of their presence. The encounter left me shaken to my core. Though physically unharmed, I couldn't escape the gnawing suspicion that I was dealing with forces beyond comprehension. To make matters worse, I soon discovered that fake social media accounts had been created using my name, photos, and personal information. Strangers began flooding my inbox with threats, accusing me of crimes I hadn't committed. My reputation was under attack, and I had no idea who was orchestrating this elaborate scheme.